All right, welcome everyone, and hello to the WonderWorks Holacracy webinar series. My name is McGrath, and I'm the co-founder of WonderWorks Consulting. Today, I've got the pleasure of being in discussion with Jon Stowe, who is the president of Dev BootCamp in San Francisco, and we're going to be focusing on the first year of implementation of Holacracy at Dev BootCamp. So, hello, Jon.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing great. Now, I want to just do a quick introduction of Jon. So basically, he's been an entrepreneur and he's really developed amazing educational businesses of all sizes, whether that's startups, whether that's large public companies. And he really is a visionary with key insights into the workings of the tech industry. So over the last 14 months, I know that Jon will get an opportunity to share many of the experiences that he's had at Dev BootCamp. And starting out with the implementation, the acquisition of Kaplan, so we'll get a chance to dig into that, and also taking over from the then president of Sharif Bichet. So we'll talk more about Holacracy practices. We'll be spending an hour together and really talking about some of the incredible things that Jon's doing, not only at Dev BootCamp internally, but also with the community, creating jobs, and some of the other subjects that we'll get a chance to dive into more. But what I wanted to kick off with, because I remember the first day that I met Jon, and my memory serves me well in saying it was actually the very first day we did a taster day at Dev BootCamp saying, is this a direction that Dev BootCamp wants to go into? And so I'd love to hear about what some of your first impressions were, and I'm sure others would too.
Sure, yeah. So, I had, my first day at Dev BootCamp was October 14th of 2013, and I joined the company from a role as Chief Operating Officer of a late-stage software company in the education space here in San Francisco. Our first day was the beginnings of our Holacracy implementation. Sharif Bichet, who's the founder of Dev BootCamp, and I had spent several months talking about the needs of the company and the then organizational structure and the challenges that the organization was facing as it began to grow. And the decision to go with Holacracy was one that we made together. The signing over of the company to Holacracy was something that Sharif did at the end of those 2 days. And I remember the first time that I sort of sat down and really pondered like what it would mean for us to be a holacratic organization, began to understand the ways that it would impact the role that I was about to take on. And I think, there's a whole lot of benefits to Holacracy that jump out at you as you implement. The idea of a meeting structure that allows for all voices to be heard, the idea of bringing transparency to organizational relationships and accountabilities, ideas around kind of weeding through what is perceived often in a company as bureaucracy or like politics, and getting at the way to get things done, being biased towards action. But for me, as a senior manager and coming from kind of a C-level position in another company, I remember just having to put away a whole bunch of management tools that I thought were really important. And I remember going to Anna sometime in the first couple of days and saying, Anna, I'm not sure I can do this. There was a real kind of moment of reality in that where I realized this was going to require in many ways a beginner mindset, an openness to kind of rethinking how things had happened in the past. And over time, in working with Holacracy, you begin to kind of unpack those assumptions. Holacracy it actually really empowers somebody who's in a lead link role, and it is. A lot of people say, well, it's a flat organizational structure; it's not hierarchical. That's actually not true. Holacracy is quite hierarchical, but it also is very empowering to people who are actually close to the work, doing the work. And so you get at the assignment of activities and tracking of activities and holding accountability for activities, but you don't really have a lot of ability to kind of step into someone's domain and get involved in the work itself. And what I realized is that a lot of people over the years assume that with power comes that sort of privilege. And there's this notion in Holacracy of creating an ability to kind of unpack that, to really get at and discern between holding accountable and tracking work and actually like leaning in and overstepping. And it was that I needed to learn and learn it, frankly, pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, cause there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and this particular last piece that you're talking about is, I love the thought of, you assign a role, you track it, and you're really creating accountability. That's kind of one whole skill. But what is viewed in most organizations as really positive, this overstepping, getting what I like to call the sticky fingers in there, and kind of messing with the area, really being able to retain a lot of control. And yeah, there are obviously some situations where you really want control and you want those roles, but there are other situations where you're giving those roles to others and really giving them that autonomy. But so say more about your journey, kind of from the initial, oh my goodness, this is actually going to take some real change here, and I really want to do that. What was that journey like, and how long did it span? I think it took about 3 or 4 months to really kind of to first, and it was a series of phases. There was the first phase was this a sense of, I think, immediate sort of disempowerment as a leader in an organization, and then the beginning of starting to see domains within the organization begin to be carved up into roles and accountabilities and circles, and so we implemented on the 14th of October, and I remember specifically a conversation, Anna, that we had round about Thanksgiving of last year, and you said, I was saying, like, I'm not sure, how to plug into this, like where are the things that I want to do. I feel like, we've sort of taken the company and divided it up in this way, like how do I sort of lean back in? And you said to me, like, what are the things that make you happy as a leader in an organization? What are the things that really are the things that get you up in the morning and get you coming to work? And I was like, it's about people. It's about the amazing people that are here, that are so talented and bring so much of themselves. And we have this thing at Dev BootCamp, we call it dropping the waterline. It's this idea that when we come to work, many times we only show about 10% of really who we are. And at Dev BootCamp, we work to expose more of that, to bring more of our full selves to work every day, and to be trusting of each other, and to be able to show those things, and in so doing, to create richer and more meaningful relationships, and to get more out of the work we do. And so you had said to me, like, where are the places that make you happy, where you want to sort of expose more of what you see as the gifts that you bring? And I love connecting with people and empowering them and seeing them sort of own attention or take on attention and drive it forward to some kind of outcome that I may never have envisioned. And if I can help to power that or support it, that's incredibly meaningful for me. I'm also, there are times I'm at the core kind of a product person, and I love being able to kind of think about products, and that was something that I brought with me from my past. And so you said, like, find the places that make you happy, create roles around them, and energize those. Do the things that you're going to
be able to bring to this organization that are most beneficial to it. And so I did that. I spent the Thanksgiving weekend sort of doing that and sort of leaned in and then re-engaged, assigned myself to some of those roles. And then there was kind of a third stage, which is when you, there's this technique that a lot of sort of senior executives have in a lot of companies. You see them, I sort of call it sort of parachuting in. Like you'll be managing across a large organization. There's no way you can be involved in the details of everything. And every once in a while, you'll drop down 3 levels, work a little while at that level, spread influence, make assignments, jiggle things up, whatever that might be, and then pop back up and move on. And you really can't, there's that sort of, like you think you're doing good, but oftentimes that can be sort of damaging to an organization. It's disempowering to people in their roles. And so in this case, if you really have an area where you see that work's not being accomplished and you need to, we call it pulling domain, if you need to step into that, either remove somebody from a role or pull the responsibility that a role or a circle may have up a level, if you're going to do that, you need to be fully prepared to actually step in and energize that role. So that's a really, that sort of power or authority with responsibility, which I think is right. And so that's happened a few times over the last year. And it was about 3 or 4 months in where, for the first time, I had somebody resign about 20 roles all at once. And guess what? I had to step into all of them until I reassigned them or made those parts of the job or the jobs that person was doing, those roles, more palatable to the organization. And so there's a broad learning curve that's associated with that, and it's actually really good because it creates clarity. You have to step into this role until you find somebody else to replace it. And it also gives you a real firm taste of what it's like for somebody hands-on doing that work at a lower level in an organization. Both really healthy things.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned Leadlink at the beginning. So the Leadlink, obviously, just for some of the people, they may not know the specifics. So a Leadlink is actually the one that assigns the roles. They allocate resources for the circle, and they prioritize the work of the circle. So Jon is the lead link of the GCC, the broadest circle at Dev BootCamp. And so when you have got all those roles assigned, and as you say, somebody resigns from 20 roles, it's like, okay, the lead link is going to take on anything that is unassigned. And that is such a different kind of, and it gets you really, really clear on, wow, yeah. You can assign to multiple people. It's not like one person leaving with a job description. They've got all these roles now. So say a little bit more about how you've experienced the difference between job descriptions and actually these kind of chunks, these roles, these mini pieces of work that most people have multiple of.
Yeah, so this is a really amazing thing about Holacracy. Well, so there's also one clarification to make, which is I was the lead link of the GCC, and now we've actually created a sub-circle for Dev BootCamp, and the GCC has actually moved up into the parent corporation. We can talk about that a little bit later.
Right.
But anyway, the idea in Holacracy is that you have multiple roles with accountabilities associated with them. And so anybody in the organization has an ability to be assigned to multiple roles. And so we have people in the organization that might have 5 or 6 roles. We have people in the organization that may be in as many as like 20 roles. And then how you choose to energize those roles is really up to you as an individual partner. We call our employees at Dev BootCamp partners, and we don't, like, my outward title might be president, but inwardly I'm a partner like everyone else. And so, I've had as many as through resignations or by pulling roles, taking roles away from people. I've had as many as 40 roles and as few as, 12 roles. I think right now I have about 16 roles, which is, perhaps a few too many, but it's a good number. And what it allows me to do is when I get up in the morning, I can look at my roles, look at the projects associated with them, and be able to see pretty clearly, like, hey, there's work I need to do today in this area. I still, plan my day out, but it gives me like a principled sort of framework, a structure, if you will, to be able to interpret the position that I have, which, in most companies, you see a job description. That's the position you apply for. When you enter into that role, the job description is relative to what you do in that company for maybe a month, right? And then particularly if it's a dynamic organization or a growing organization, a young organization, then that job description is likely to change. I was the CTO at a large, publicly held education company, and my I used to sort of kid around that I was like CTO and the AV guy, because whenever there would be a problem with setting up for a meeting or something like this, then I would end up doing that work too. So I think that there's in Holacracy this ability to recognize all the different roles that you might be energizing. Like we have a role in San Francisco that's a vegetation hydration specialist, who's somebody who goes around and waters the plants. And the work's called out, and it turned out the person who was assigned to the role really hated it, and there was somebody else in the organization that loved plants and really wanted to do it. And so it's really easy to just unpack that one role from this collection of roles that the person had and give it to somebody who wants to do it. So, I have a couple of roles that are really interesting. I'll talk about one of them. One of them is I'm not an HR specialist, and I'm not involved in. I'm very closely related to our CFO. He's very much a partner with me in this, but I'm not in that circle. But I am involved in that circle in a role called HR sounding board. And so when there's a concern that comes up, we just had an issue come up with a benefits plan that we're rolling out for 2015. People came to me in that role and they were like, "Hey, John, we don't feel good about it." It was a role that I was able to energize, that I was able to take on very quickly, make for specific actionable change, work to make that change, and then we're getting ready to kind of roll out a revision to that policy. And it's that sort of ability to kind of plug into a role. We call it energizing, or filling that role for a period of time. Being able to act within it, accomplish what you need to, and then essentially sort of back out, back away from it for a time and energize something else.
Yeah.
I love that about Holacracy. And it gives people an ability to kind of experience the organization in different ways at different times and bring their full selves, because let's face it, people love to do all kinds of things in a company.
Yeah, what I love about that is also it's so clear. You are there as a sounding board, and so you know where the decision making is, and you can get clear on what sounding board is. So it allows then CFO to interface with you in a really effective way. I had a thought that you can type in questions into the chat window for anybody that's out there that's got questions popping up. And I thought I'd check in with Jay to see if there are any that feel like this is a good time to ask. And if not, we'll pop back later and check in. So, Jay, any particular questions there?
Sure. While we're on the topic of roles, there's a couple questions from Curtis Mickelson, wondering, is there an average or typical number of roles that people are taking on? And also, in relating to that, why would someone resign from 20 roles at once? Would that be, one hopes, quite an exceptional situation?
So I'll take the first piece about the number, because I've seen people that only have 3 roles, and then I've seen the situation where people are, like John had 45. So it can be, there's no typical number. I think, depends how big the chunks are, but I'll pass it over to you, John, about the 20 roles. I know I've got many reasons why that might happen, but over to you.
Yeah, so the answer is it's not happened more than that once. In this case, it was somebody who was in a number of leadership roles when I joined the company who really, someone who had leadership ability, but really wasn't very happy, had been in this role sort of because the Sharif, the founder, wanted this person to be in that role and take on that responsibility, but wasn't particularly happy in the organization. And early on, I said to this person, like, what makes you happy? What do you want to do? And it turned out this person really just wanted to teach. Somebody who's a really gifted engineer who felt the most connection in leading a cohort and being close to our students, and had they always talk about, well, you get like promoted if you're good at something, you get sort of promoted to the next level up, and you sort of get promoted out of happiness and into roles until you are no longer able to be effective in them, and that's at some level that I think that is can be true in a normal organization. So, and that had happened prior to our implementation. So for this person, they really wanted to get back to where they started and do the thing that they loved. And I, a question, I think the original question that prompted that resignation, that mass resignation, was a question to you, Anna, about like, I'm not happy. I don't like, this is all great, but like, how is this going to make my day-to-day happier? And your response was, well, if you don't like what you're doing, resign the roles. And so sure enough, that was what happened. And it ended up being a really good thing for the whole organization, because it pretty quickly exposed all the work that this person was doing and wasn't really being recognized for. And it allowed us to kind of re-engineer the roles, and also over time to reassign them to people that really wanted to do different aspects of what it was. And I'll give one example. There was another teacher who was at Dev BootCamp and was a pretty quiet teacher, very, very kind, very empathetic, amazing with students, but kind of wanted to be sort of like MC for the organization, to lead discussions that we have as a community, as a school here in San Francisco, but wasn't comfortable with all of the other aspects of leadership, such as teacher scheduling or discipline issues or whatever that might be. And so in this case, that person was able to energize an MC role, which he's still in today, do the things that he really liked, and continue with the teaching. And it takes time. You get to know the people in the organization over time, and then as a lead link, as a leader of a circle, when you make assignments, hopefully you know your team well enough to know who's going to be great in what role.
Yeah, and I think that it really is you're indicating, it gets people to move into what they're talented at, what they love doing, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it really starts getting the whole group orienting towards that, which to me is one of the real aspects that I love of this system. So we talked about some of the positives, some of the the great things. What about specific challenges that you faced? Whether they're big challenges or big wins that you've experienced? Sure.
We've had a lot of, so we've just completed really our first year of Holacracy at Dev BootCamp. We've had a lot of learnings, I'll call them, and there's a couple of things happen. I'll talk about trends, and out of that will come what I would describe as some structural tensions that happened during that time. The first one was when we started out, Dev BootCamp was founded by engineers, and with a strong sense of purpose and self, and a sense of ownership of the organization. And Holacracy gave voice to that, but also gave clear domains so that people who owned different parts of how the organization worked were able to, we weren't stuck in gridlock arguing about how things should be. We were able to have great debate about that, but then at the end of the day, the decision was once it was passed into governance, once an idea or an accountability was passed into governance, we were able to integrate feedback and then move forward and empowered the people that owned the different parts of the organization. And then, but one of those things was that a lot of we've had founders of several locations. We're in San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. We're just launching some work in Columbus, Ohio, and other locations. And so we started out with what I would describe as sort of a location-based structure. Each of the circles that we created in the beginning were sort of autonomous. And what we quickly began to see, and it just emerged, like this idea in Holacracy of dynamic steering led to the evolution of these location circles towards what I would describe as a set of functional circles. Where
and do you want to take a moment just to say a little bit about dynamic steering, just that concept?
Sure. So I'll talk about it, Anna, as I think about it, and then you just like fill in the gaps. So the way I think about dynamic steering is the idea that the company has like overall strategies, which are also holacratic and are determined on a fairly regular basis. But dynamic steering is, for me, is this idea that through governance and through tactical meetings on a week, so governance on a monthly basis, tactical on a weekly basis in our case, you have this ability to continue to kind of figure out where tensions exist in the organization to be responsive not only to the needs internally, but also to your customers externally. And dynamic steering allows you to do these sort of mini reorgs and both through processing of tensions on a weekly basis and then through processing of larger governance issues on a monthly basis that allow you to be more responsive to the needs of your market and the needs of your internal organization. And so, there was in that kind of a dynamic, things can happen compared to a normal organization in a very fast manner. At the time that you're involved in it, there's a little bit of a distortion in that you think, well, I brought this tension up 3 days ago, why hasn't it been processed? And then you realize like a week later that it's processed and put aside. And so in the moment, it feels like it's not happening fast enough, but in a little bit longer time frame, like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the case of governance, you realize that the organization is extremely responsive, because in a normal organization, you'll go months and months and months, and there'll be these underlying issues that are not being addressed until somebody high enough in the organization becomes aware of it and does something sort of unilaterally. And so the ability for everybody to have eyes and ears about what's happening to the company and to the market in real time, and to be able to bring those and have a forum for being able to address them is a structure unlike anything I've ever participated in. It's really quite amazing. That's how I think about dynamic steering.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just iterating forward. So perfect.
Yeah. So I mentioned that we moved to a functional structure over time, and there was a sense of, I think, for location leads who were brilliant entrepreneurs, each in their own right. There was this sense of disempowerment, like, hey, like you just created a careers circle. What about my careers team? Or, you just created an admissions circle that's going to work on admissions across the board. These are people that were formerly part of my circle. What does that mean? And so we had to develop some, I would call them sort of hacks within Holacracy, or like apps is the way that Holacracy 1 would describe them, to kind of process those things. So one of those things, for instance, was we determined this idea of a primary circle structure, and every partner in the organization is a member of a primary circle, and that's where they spend the most of their time energizing roles, and that allows for things like performance reviews, compensation changes, feedback sessions, and if needed, performance improvement process. And so primary circle structure was something that came out of that, one of the tensions that we ran into. Another one was what happens if somebody sort of de-energizes or isn't fully energizing a series of roles, and you need to kind of step in and work with them to work on like a performance situation where somebody's not realizing what they need to. I mean, Holacracy sort of demands a lot of the individual in the organization, and it's a big ask. And this is something we adopted. So there were people in the organization who, over the first few months of Holacracy, determined this probably isn't going to work for me. Like I'd much rather have somebody sort of telling me what to do and then deliver on those things and then move forward, as opposed to trying to figure out what I should do today myself. We had, during the implementation, we had one person decide to leave. Another person who really didn't feel great about Holacracy actually decided to kind of lean in and live with it a little bit, and that person is actually a Leadlink today. So I think it's, but on the whole, when we implemented Holacracy, most of the organization saw it and lived through. I think in any implementation, this is what I've learned from talking to other companies that have implemented, that it's the first 3 to 6 months is a little bit of a pendulum swing. There's some sticky moments there, and then you start to sort of find traction. And we've periodically done surveys of our partners to find out how they were feeling about Holacracy, and we just concluded another one last week. And I did one of our Leadlinks as well. And on a scale of 1 to 5 across the organization, I would say the majority of staff are comfortable with the structure and feel empowered by it.
Yeah, great. And we kind of talked to you indicated a little bit about really some of those moments where you could really tell there was a big win. And if you kind of scan back and you look at the win, what is the win that really comes to mind for you individually and for Dev BootCamp as a whole? How does that show up for you?
I think we've had a number of them. I'll mention a couple quickly, and then we can dive deeper if needed. So the company was acquired by Kaplan Education in July, and it was quite a long due diligence process, about 6 months. Where they were sort of trying to get comfortable with who we were as an organization and looking at us, and we were engaged in conversations around that. There was a big question in my mind about what would happen to DBC after the acquisition, and this is a very, very unique place. The culture here is, even without Holacracy, the culture here has always been very special and unique. It's a place where we talk about the idea of finding exquisite livelihood for all people involved, for our staff, for our students, and for our employer partners. And we also have a double bottom line. We're mission driven as well as financially driven. And there were big questions for me about whether we'd be able to kind of sustain that mission. For us, our mission is around diversification of the IT industry. It's in many ways this the IT industry represents sort of a monoculture, and our goal is proportional representation within this industry. We're working very hard at that. And how would that double bottom line, which is becoming more tangible over time with specific goals and also resources and investment put at that, be able to be proved out? And I think the big moment for me over the last year was when the parent organization, the division of Kaplan that purchased a group called Kaplan Advanced, part of Kaplan Test Prep, came to us. I mean, amazing people who were very forward thinking, but within this large kind of traditional publicly held corporation came to us and said, we see the benefits of this, and we think it's time for us to be holacratic as well. And and that was one of those moments where the ability to design an interface to this parent organization and to have that organization also become holacratic because they saw the effectiveness of the system was a huge win. I was like, this is really, really important, and potentially the start of a movement, I think, to think about how organizational systems or organizational operating systems in large corporations change over the next decade or two or so. Gave me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I must admit, and I was kind of privy to some of the, or I knew it was coming, and I wondered how it would be impacted, and would Holacracy survive, and some of those questions, and to see more being wrapped under the holacratic arm, it is exciting, because I think if I think about Zappos, they went from top down, they went the whole organization, whereas this to me is so exciting because it's a whole entity that was acquired, and now what is that filtering upward? So, get to see totally a different experience. So I'm definitely watching this space as it emerges, and, really happy to see you on the forefront of that. I'm thinking maybe it might be a good idea to double check with Jay to see if there are other questions in the chat window. So Jay, have you got anything that's bubbling up there for us?
Sure. A couple questions coming through for Jon, particularly. Back toward the beginning from Daniel Work, wondering how many full-time people are there at Dev BootCamp? And also, how does Holacracy work with short-term contractors brought into Dev BootCamp?
Great question. Yeah, that's a question, and it's somewhat related to scale. When we adopted Holacracy, the company was about we're about 40 full-time employees. We're well over 65 now, and we've been able to grow with Holacracy. I think the question of scale comes in, and we've done. I talked a little bit about Holacracy hacks, or apps that we've built on top of Holacracy. So at Dev BootCamp, everything about Dev BootCamp is sort of iterative and agile, and that's true of our curriculum, which is constantly under revision, but it's true of the organization through Holacracy, and it's true of our processes and documentation as well. The idea is just enough structure to enable forward movement, but not so much that it's actually sort of squishing the organization or pushing it down. And so we do that and sort of manage it through GitHub, which is a code repository system that we actually everything lives in GitHub. And so we built a wiki. We use that to contain kind of our institutional knowledge. And at Dev BootCamp, every 3 weeks, a new cohort of students come in to the organization, and whenever they come in, we have kind of a core repository which contains the student handbook and all of the curriculum, and we actually fork that into a new org for the new cohorts, and then the instructors teach off of that fork for that cohort as they come through the program. And then the learnings from that, if there's improvements or modifications, then those are re-merged into the trunk if we see better outcomes. So there's this constant improvement process going on, and so for the organization, it's a similar kind of thing. And we have a lot of people that work with us as contractors on an hourly rate. And some of those people, depending on their role, are reflected in GlassFrog, but others are not. The role is sort of defined and extracted from GlassFrog. It may be represented by an individual who sort of generally represents the group of people doing that work. But because that's the people that are working here temporarily are, it really is fairly transient, temporary. They're not added to Glassfrog on a regular basis, and it's really just contract workers that we would have. Most people who are, in fact, everybody who's full time here is represented as an account of Glassfrog.
Yeah, a number of organizations, when they have kind of those contractor or large pools of people like call center, as Jon said, there's a rep link. So a rep link can still represent that group of people. So there's still a place to process the tensions, which is kind of the critical piece. Jay, anything else that's popping up there?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple other great questions in here relating again to the structure of Dev BootCamp. Curtis Michelson is wondering, is Dev BootCamp organized as a nonprofit or a for-profit org? And do you think Holacracy plays better or worse in either environment?
I'll give my opinion on this. I've worked for nonprofits and I've worked for a lot of for-profits. DBC is a for-profit entity. That was intentional in the founding of the company. Because of our double bottom line, the financial goals are, I think, balanced by our social mission, which is more reasonable. I think in California there's this notion now of a B Corp. I think had that been more visible to the founders, they might have chosen that route. But we were organized as a separate entity, for-profit one, and now we're part of Kaplan Education, which is in turn part of Graham Holdings. It's the former Washington Post company, a publicly held company. So I think that Holacracies are great for both types of organizations, just because of the clarity and the transparency and accountability that comes from it. So many times, the not-for-profits that I've worked in, I found that there was sometimes the social mission and the way that people were motivated to work sort of got in the way of getting stuff done, and that's not universally true, but in a few instances I've seen that. And I think Holacracy, because of the way a tactical meeting works, where work is assigned as a project or an accountability, and then you have checklist items where you're checking to see that the work got done, or providing an update in a very public way about the projects that you've been assigned. There's kind of a group level accountability that comes from that without it being a public shaming or a chastisement or even a one-on-one sort of feedback. It's really about coming forward and talking about the work you've accomplished over the last week to a larger group of people, your colleagues, whom you want to support yourself, and you want to participate and engage with. And so that sort of accountability is really it's quite beautiful. It's like, here's what I'm doing. This is my work. This is where I chose to do my work in the last week, and this is the update. And then if some of the report on that leads to attention, or somebody's feeling, I want to talk just a second about attention. Like, the idea of attention, the way it's defined in Holacracy, is this felt sense of a specific gap between current reality and a sense of potential. And that, if there's a lot of trust in an organization and good rapport, that somebody may report on a project they're working on, and it may bring up attention for someone else. Like, I wish that instead of working on this part of the project this week, that you'd work on this part of the project. And so in a tactical meeting, you can get at those things in a pretty kind of concise way. And it's not like, hey, you're stepping into my project. It's like, I just feel attention that maybe, the work could have been done differently, or like, what about this piece of something that wasn't paid attention to? And then what comes out of that can be an action item. Oftentimes it may be just a follow-up conversation But it could also be maybe it's the creation of a new project, or maybe it's the reprioritization of a project, or maybe it's feedback to a Leadlink about the prioritization of the project. So there's this, when a circle's operating well, there's this kind of rapport and trust that occurs, and you start to sort of we sort of think of it like a holacracy, just a kind of a you start to understand and process the words and the procedures of holacracy, which in the beginning are sort of awkward, in a very kind of quick, rapid-fire sequence, and it leads to really great work and really good, productive meetings where you process, 35 or 40 tensions in an hour, which is amazing. You don't see that in a traditional structure.
Yeah, I think that is what attracts, like, I think about Whitby Institute, they're really interested in doing things around Holacracy. Shareable, another nonprofit. They're two nonprofits, a cooperative, Three Stone Hearth, and then you've got all the for-profits. And so to me, do you want to get the work done? Do you want to iterate forward fast? Do you want to give accountability? And do you want to get everyone's perspectives in the mix and not have chaos? And so I think it's really about, is that what you want, or do you want to really control and be able to dive in and swoop and grab work? And if you want to be more controlling, then you want more of a traditional thing, so that's kind of the way I see it. I'll check in with Jay, because I'd like to hear about a little bit of what's going forward, and maybe actually, I'll go back to you, Jon, about what's on the horizon as you think about some of the amazing initiatives you've got going on. What's kind of the picture of Dev BootCamp, whether that's from a Holacracy perspective or, I think about the diversity. How's diversity showing up in a structural way within Holacracy? Yeah.
So do we want to check with Jay and see if there's any,
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I give you time for that. So yeah, check back with Jay. Where are we going? Any questions, Jay?
Sure. Well, there's a few more questions. We could take one more practical one for a minute from Nancy, who's wondering, how does one create roles? And is there a resource or typical roles within startup organizations? Do you have any comments about that one?
Yeah, well, I would say that on a basic level of structurally, how does that happen? Roles are created in governance. And so at the very beginning, if you're talking about the very beginning, you're creating a starting structure. And that was that 2-day experience that Jon and I had about, putting all the roles up on the wall and what circles do we want, and kind of an initial starting structure. But then as you go forward every month in the governance meeting, you create roles. And you can pass governance over email as well. So I'll say that much. But Jon, how do you want to attack that?
Yeah, I mean, just in a really practical way, when we started, I think there were maybe 14 of us around a table, and I didn't have a lot of work to do at that point because I was brand new, but it was like, what are the things you're doing in a day? What are the different activities that you do, and then breaking those down into like groups of activities, and then beginning to kind of cluster them, and then build from that to like kind of congeal them into roles with several accountabilities underneath them. It was an exercise we did over a few hours, and Anna did a really, I think, of the implementation that we had. I think this is a place where Anna's approach and where WonderWorks just like really shone. I think making this activity, which was pretty intense, a lot of fun, and being kind of creative in how we defined those roles initially. We were off-site. We were at this great conference center up in Marin, and it was a lot of fun to kind of sort of figure out what the work was that was being done around the company, and to talk about it, and then to have these little mini debates about like, well, I don't, is a teacher and a coach the same thing, and is somebody who's a teacher also responsible for doing curriculum, or is that somebody else who's maybe a curriculum writer or somebody working on curriculum on the side, and sort of like teasing apart the work that was being done. And it was really satisfying to see exactly how much work was being done across the organization, but it was also really amazing to kind of start that structure and then get it into first few governance meetings with the larger organization and see how the organization interpreted that. It led to some really quick little morphs of roles in the early days. It's a good kind of launching point.
All right, back to you, Jay. I'll go one more question, and then I'm going to come back to Jon.
Okay, one more question. A question around HR from Curtis, or now called human capital. He's making a comment saying that HR departments are often the last base stations of many of the old paradigms. And in his experience, they are fearing the idea of holacracy and even talking about it. How do you deal with or address their fears and make them allies? Any thoughts from either of you about that, HR department?
I have some thoughts on that. When we were first talking to Kaplan about this, and they were looking at it, and one of the amazing things that happened very early on was we gave accounts to Kaplan HR in Glassfrog and exposed them fully to the roles and the accountabilities associated with them, with these circles. And I remember a very early conversation. The HR team at Kaplan has been amazing and really willing to, and open to kind of going places with this. But I had them look at those roles and they're like, people really act within these accountabilities? Like these accountabilities actually describe the work that people are really doing? Because they were so used to seeing job descriptions that as I said earlier, like get obsolete in about 30 to 60 days after you start a job. And so the ability to align, to say, okay, this person is acting in these roles and energizing them on a regular basis, and then to say, when we go to evaluate this person, there's these are the performance objectives, and if that person's incentivized above and beyond normal comp range, then these are the ways that we would be able to design incentive comp using these role descriptions was an eye-opener for them. They saw that as really powerful. There's the dynamicism, which we talked about. So somebody may pop out of a role or pop into another one, and we had to figure out some apps for how compensation would be applied based on sort of level of seniority in the organization. Holacracy 1 defines kind of 3 levels of participation in the organization with corresponding levels of compensation. For us, that hasn't really worked. I mean, we sort of have these primary circles and primary roles with then additional roles that are added on, and we're still sort of figuring out how that leads to comp levels. But there's a little bit of that sort of moving in and out of roles and what happens to compensation when that happens that throws HR off. But the second place where I think the HR organization really sort of saw Holacracy shine, where it was an easy sell, was I had them attend just as observers, and this is it's a good little tool. Had them attend a tactical and a governance meeting, and the idea that you can do a corporate reorganization every 30 days, and nobody loses their job, and nobody, you don't have to design severance packages, or it may cause a little bit of short-term discomfort, but then people find their new roles and end up moving into new places in the company. Like, the big events for somebody working in HR happen when the needs of the company divert over time from the structure and skills of the organization, from the people that are in there. So had conversations in the last few weeks with lots of large corporations where over time the skills of their employees have deteriorated and fallen away to the point where the organization is now moving in this direction, and the skills and work of a lot of the employees are sort of flat or moving away. And it's when those deltas get really big that you end up with problems that need to be solved by an HR organization. And in the case of Holacracy, that delta never really occurs. You've always got this sort of moving along, and if the organization is truly education focused, you know, like has the right sort of support mechanisms in place to keep people sort of tuned up in their skills and their jobs, you have this beautiful little lockstep that occurs. I don't know that we've achieved it, but I can see a way for that to happen more effectively with this system.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the thought pattern for me is, if HR is compliant, then there can still be some compliance roles in there. But I think that the true power of what HR is in a holacratic environment can be amazing. But a whole bunch of what they do will no longer happen. But to me, what they will do will really deliver on the strategy of the organization. So if an organization wants to have a strategic people department, you know, HR, call it whatever you want to call it, but really delivering what the organization needs around recruiting, etc., it really can happen in this, and that old system kind of falls away. But it doesn't mean we don't honor their talents. They just show up in different ways.
Yeah, well said, Anna. I agree with that.
And I think that I do think that the issue, when I think about the diversity issue that is present and really mission-driven within Dev BootCamp, I remember the early stage conversations, and I'm wondering where that is and how that structure has really evolved before we, you know, end. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about where you're at and where you're focused.
Great. So really happy to talk about that. We started out with a kind of a statement about diversity that we thought we wanted to have as an organization, and then really in sort of an organic fashion, diversity roles were created within the location circles, and then and we had people that took on those sort of diversity roles that were focused on, at first, how do we as an organization attract a more diverse talent pool, both in terms of staff, partners, but also students, with the goal of really proportional representation, and as I said earlier, a larger goal of kind of, you know, working to change the industry. So what happened was that then we created some larger, these at sort of the global level, the GCC level, we created some diversity steward roles. And, you know, there was a point in time where there were people at the company that started to say, you know, like, okay, you've sort of paid lip service to this idea. You may be working at it, but like, really, how much teeth does this role have? You know, perhaps and it's interesting to kind of see the parallel in the larger culture, the issues that have come forward over the last few weeks, and the larger questions about the oppressive society that we continue to live in, and the unspoken rules that are sort of part of that lead to the sorts of just oppression that we see. And when we started to get at those things as an organization, we realized that the roles that we had and the structure we had wasn't sufficient, and we created governance to take the roles and explode them into a circle, a diversity circle. And so a lot of discussion about that, and it led to immediately a project being created for somebody who was part of a minority within the organization to define what diversity needed to be for us as an organization. And she really took that on in an incredible way, and interviewed many people, talked to the whole organization, thought about what it meant for her as a teacher, and And then the second part of that was that the roles were started to be defined within the organization, and a lot of what came out of it was about education and training. And Kaplan has its own training around this, around diversity, but also around other relevant issues such as sexual harassment and other things that come up in the workplace, particularly related to issues in terms of support for women or people of color. And so we realized that what was going to come from Kaplan was not sort of enough for where we wanted to go. Mm-hmm. And it's led to real solid work being done now of a Leadlink who is taking this on and an amazing amounts of sort of energy and now resources going into this for us as a company. And that circle just recently moved up out of the DBC circle into the parent organization.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, well.
It's incredible. Has potential to impact the larger parent corporation as well.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And I know we're coming to a close here, but I'm really, because that's news to me. I didn't know that had happened, but that's great because you can see the enormous potential from that. Well, I know there's so much more that we could talk about. I really appreciate your time and kind of gifting this out to the community to give them an insight into what the first year was like for you. Again, thank you to everyone as a participant, and we look forward to more webinars giving you different information about Holacracy. But thank you very much, Jon. Any parting words?
I would encourage anybody who's thinking about Holacracy to, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm just Jon, Jon, at devbootcamp.com. And also, if you go down this path, it really is, it's like a decision to kind of like engage reality in a new way. It's like, I think of it as kind of like swallowing the red pill. It's a really important first step. So go for it. Yeah.
Thank you. Big thank you, Jon. If you've got questions, you can go Anna@WonderWorks, hello@WonderWorks. Happy to help you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jon. And we'll close off now.
Bye.
Bye.